Welcome to Andy Staples on 3. Happy Saturday night. It has been quite a day in college football. A lot of chalk, but one incredibly shocking result that on the verge of the first college football playoff ranking really kind of makes things interesting because, Jesse Simonton, we get all these questions about what if all these leagues finish with an undefeated champ? Well, they're not going to, because the Big 12 is going to have a champion that has at least one loss, because all the teams in the Big 12 now have at least one loss, thanks to Oklahoma's loss at Kansas.
Yeah, there was a lot of consternation and content created, I think, specifically in the last 2 weeks about this supposed chaos scenario. The 5 undefeated champs, who would get left out, who would get snubbed. No, Andy, we're looking at a chaos Big 12.
Yes.
That's what we're looking at.
And potentially more chaotic as you go, because you've got Bedlam next week, which could be the last Bedlam for a long, long time, because Oklahoma State doesn't want to play anymore.
Mark.
Yep. You got Kansas State, Texas. If Kansas State wins, it puts them in the driver's seat for the Big 12 championship game, sort of, because they have a loss to Oklahoma State, which is still controlling in the mix. They've got one conference loss. Iowa State is
just
not
out there
done
taking
yet.
care of business.
It's
just out there.
And then Kansas.
It's again, we've ourselves included, we've talked a lot about the carnage in the Pac-12 and these teams cannibalizing each other in November. I think we're setting up for the exact same thing in the Big 12. I mean, you were right. Today did go chalk, but I think we also, as chalky as it was, I think we also confirmed either some things or learned some things. I think a lot of folks thought that the Sooners were maybe a little bit of a paper tiger. They had the awesome win against Texas, but then you have kind of that game against Cincinnati where you go, and then last weekend against UCF really kind of, popped up the antennas. The run defense is not very good. They were super sloppy today, had over 100 yards of penalties, several turnovers. I thought they were going to get at Oklahoma State next weekend. That was the one that I had circled. But now that this loss happened, it's just the dominoes, who knows? I mean, Texas, they took care of business today against BYU. Malik Murphy was just okay. They're in for it next weekend because Kansas State is just annihilating teams. They have not allowed a touchdown, Andy, in 9 quarters.
And they did it differently today. Today, it was not Avery Johnson and Will Howard. It was Will Howard had the hot hand, so they stuck with him. Avery Johnson did not play as well. So you don't know what you're going to get if you're Texas next week. And Oklahoma State messed around with Cincinnati for 2.5 quarters and then blew them out in the third quarter.
Yeah, I mean, this is it has become an extremely competitive and interesting league. I don't think the way it looks right now, I'm not sure there's a college football playoff contender here, because I don't think Oklahoma is one, even if they do win out, because I just don't think that they've been overly impressive writ large. But we'll see.
I mean, the Texas win over Alabama helps, but Texas has to keep winning.
It does. Yeah. Exactly. Texas and if Texas can take care of business again against a Kansas State team that in the last 3 weeks has just blown the doors off people. Like you said, Will Howard was fantastic today. He had 1 incompletion in the first half, 150 some odd yards, 2 scores. They got that 2-headed tailback. They got the Ward kid from Florida State, Gibbons. They are a solid football team. And Chris Kleiman, he likes that they have this, kind of lunch pail. Will show up anytime, anywhere. Let's find out next week. It's going to be a big game.
Yeah, that is going to be a fun one. But let's talk about this Oklahoma-Kansas game a little bit because, by the way, North Carolina, Georgia Tech still happening. North Carolina just fumbled. Georgia Tech takes over up 4 with 2:54 to go. So we'll talk about that one when it ends. But so this game, I did an instant reaction video, and the Oklahoma fans were all over Jeff Lebby for being very conservative. Remember, Oklahoma intercepts a screen pass with basically like 2 minutes to go, or well, with about 3.5, 4 minutes to go. And
second
don't do anything with it. They go -2 yards in 3 plays, 3 and out, and then they punt. And everybody's killing Jeff Lebby for being conservative on that series. How about kill your defense for letting Kansas go 80 yards in 61 seconds? That's why you lost. It's not because they went conservative offensively. You lost because you let Kansas go through you like a hot knife through butter.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought it was just kind of a complete team meltdown because the offense did not play particularly well early, and then the defense could not. Again, they could not stop the run at all for the entire game. And credit to the backup quarterback. He made two big mistakes in the fourth quarter, but he led them down the field. He had that touchdown drive where it looked like he was Usain Bolt running down the sideline there in the early in the second half. I mean, the fact that you beat Oklahoma for the first time in 19 years without Jalen Daniels is rather remarkable. I think you said it on your live show. I wrote it in kind of some takeaways from what this game meant. The check for Lance Leopold just went up. The price went up. I mean, his agent is going to be fielding calls from Michigan State and others, and Kansas fans don't want to hear that after their biggest program win in several decades. But kudos to him and what he's done with that team and that school.
It's remarkable, and I don't think we can call Jason Bean the backup quarterback anymore. I think we got to call him the starting quarterback because Jalen Daniels has been out for a while. You kind of wonder, Jalen Daniels only played in 3 games.
Cam Rising 2.0?
Yeah, he could redshirt. He could be somewhere else next year or back at Kansas next year, depending on how things go. And I think that's the thing you got to think about. And then still, he's there. If he wants to take part in the rest of the season, if he feels healthy enough, he can do that too. So the job that Leipold's done there is absolutely remarkable because you got to remember, he got it the day of the spring game in 2021. They fired Les Miles in the spring because it was all that stuff that was coming out about what happened at LSU when Les Miles was the coach. So they fire Les Miles and Jeff Long, the AD at Kansas at the same time. And it just, I mean, I cannot believe how quickly Lance Leipold turned them into a winner. It's not like they're this cute little story. Like, they straight up beat Oklahoma today.
And they straight up beat Oklahoma, and they're going to back-to-back bowl games for back-to-back seasons for the second time ever. And this is off a program that he inherited that went 0-9 off that tire fire from Les Miles. And then to take over after the spring, to beat Texas in year one, to get College Game Day and get them ranked last season to where they're 6-2 now. It is. You used the word, and it's not hyperbolic. It is legitimately remarkable what he has done with perhaps, I think, when he inherited it, the most moribund program in the country at that time.
Yeah, and they had, serious scholarship deficit, all of the stuff that they had to deal with. And I mean, they're not just plucky, like they are legit good. And last year they started
run really fun stuff.
Yes, they're fun to watch.
They run like the quarterback. They run like a quarterback reverse pitch, and he, to the Wildcat quarterback, and he's throwing it. I mean, they're fun.
Yeah. By the way, Tez Walker was the player on that North Carolina play. He's still down, and Mac Brown's out there, and it's been a while, so we'll let you know as that goes on too. But this is just one of those things that the Big 12 is going to maybe eat itself. The Pac-12 might eat itself. I don't know. This was another, we can get to Washington and Stanford because Washington barely survived Stanford. Got lucky that they dropped a pass on a 4th down play where they could have probably done it. Tez Walker is up. They're helping him off the field. I'm sure he's done for the night. I hope he's all right. But let's talk about the premier game in the Pac-12 on Saturday, and that was Oregon-Utah, and it was never close. Oregon just smashed Utah.
They rolled down the field in the first series, Andy, and you could just tell this was going to be a long, long afternoon for the Utes. They'd won 29-30 at Rice-Eccles. That place is a house of horrors, and yet, the Bo Nix road woes, or whatever you want to call them, that whole theme died today, because he was brilliant in the first half. 3 total touchdowns, I think, and Oregon's defensive line just controlled the line of scrimmage. I mean, Utah could not do anything on the ground. Bryson Barnes, the pig farmer was a fun story for a week, but he got put back in the pen today because he just got hounded by the Ducks, all afternoon.
Well, and you kept wondering how long Utah was going to be able to put it together and string.
You can only
this
duct
offense
tape
together.
so long,
right? And I thought after they lost to Oregon State that everybody kind of had the blueprint, but it didn't work out that way. They wound up reeling off some wins, but Oregon just flat out better. And Oregon does seem to be on a mission to get back to playing against Washington. I kind of think Oregon and the Beavers, like the Beavers, may be the thing standing in the way. They may be the only thing standing in the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. How do you feel on this? To me, Oregon, they have the loss to Washington heads up. I think they're the best team in the Pac-12.
I think there's a good chance of that. We need to see them beat Washington because Washington won that game fair and square. But I absolutely do think if we see that again, that there's a really good chance that Oregon wins that game. Especially, it'll be in Vegas. It wouldn't be in Seattle. So I'm excited about the way the Pac-12 is going to finish up. There's not much else to say about the Oregon-Utah game. Bo Nix was awesome, efficient again, 248 yards passing on 24 and 31, 2 touchdowns. Bucky Irving, 83 yards on 14 carries. They carried 27 times for 142 yards, 3 TDs. They were super efficient today. Defensively, they played great. Like that's really all you need to say. They whipped Utah. Elsewhere in the Pac-12, and this is a team that has to play Washington and Oregon, and we thought was going to be a contender. USC survives Cal in a game that started off delayed by a protest, as one would expect in Berkeley. Jesse, do you remember why the protest was happening?
I actually did not see what this protest was about. This is a good one. Okay. So there was a professor suspended for allegedly stalking another professor. And the protest was... We got a Lifetime original breaking out here.
Yeah, the protest was in support of the professor who was accused of stalking. This professor, by the way, according to, I guess, the investigative reports, did admit to some light stalking. Or possibly some heavy stalking. And so I will repeat, the protest was in favor of the professor doing the stalking, not the one getting stalked. So there you go, higher education. But game starts, Cal races out to a lead. They were up, I think, 28-13 in the second quarter and had a lead toward the end. They end up getting within 1, could have kicked the extra point and gone to overtime, but decide to go for 2 and win the game, and they lose. They don't get the 2 and they lose. But USC is not what they were supposed to be. It's just another embarrassing performance by their defense. Like, Washington is going to destroy that defense.
Well, I know you were in, I think Ari Wasserman, your former podcast buddy.
We were in the same press box.
Was in the same press box today in Jacksonville. I think his favorite word for these sorts of games is grab ass. This game was the grab ass game. I mean, I don't know. USC gave up 550 yards again. They actually had 4 takeaways, but they needed 21 unanswered points in the fourth quarter to beat a legitimately terrible Cal team. We should also note that Wilcox went for 2, correctly so, because you don't have anything to lose. The ESPN Galloway and Matt Berry were, saying kick the extra point. No, go for the win. Like you had nothing. Yeah,
you've been getting hammered in the fourth quarter. Yeah, so
right, you could have tied. He could have tied the game and gone to overtime, but he goes for the win, and the Trojans finally get a key stop. What's the most annoying thing about these things, Andy, isn't that it's just the same performance, each week. It's that each week Lincoln Riley then goes in his post-game press conferences and says these bizarre statements that like we're right there, we're close.
Yeah, no, you're not close. And you play Washington and Oregon back to back.
I mean, it's just, dude, read the room, man. Say less.
Well, at some point he has to explain why he's kept Alex Grinch around. And I mean, like, people close to him have told him, for your sake and for Alex Grinch's sake, this was, last offseason, you need to get rid of him. Because the longer he's here and under this microscope, it gets worse for him when he goes to try to find another job.
This was 500-yard game showings ago.
Jenna says USC needs to recruit a defensive line. Riley is an offensive line. No, he's not. They don't have a good offensive line either.
No, they don't. And they finally at least gave Marshawn Lloyd double-digit carries tonight. He had like a $115 on 16 carries. I mean, they're unserious. And they technically are alive in the Pac-12 because they have just the one Pac-12 loss. But, yeah, unserious.
How much is Michael Penix going to throw for against them next week?
Yeah, probably 400. And Bo Nix and Bucky Irving and company will rack up 600 yards on them too.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be ugly. It is going to be
now.
Ugly.
They will score. I will say this: they will score on the Huskies because the Huskies have warts defensively. Kalen DeBoer was concerned coming into the season that they had a lack of depth, and they've suffered a few injuries. Haven't been significant ones, but you start losing some numbers, and suddenly you see these performances in back-to-back weeks where it's like, what's going on, fellas?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk Washington. They beat Stanford 42-33. It was much closer than that score indicates. Stanford had a fourth down play with about 3 minutes to go, ran a trick play. Basically, the ball was dropped, and that's what happened. Oh, Georgia Tech is going to beat North Carolina, by the way. They've run for about 250 yards in the fourth quarter. The fourth quarter, yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a second. But Washington survives Stanford. This is the second week in a row Washington has gotten very close to losing to a team it had no business losing to. It was Arizona State last week. This week it's Stanford. This one can't be blamed on a hangover following the Oregon win. Like, legitimate concerns for the Huskies right now.
Yeah, I mean, you gave up, I think, you talk about how many yards Michael Penix is going to throw. I mean, Caleb Williams, again, I think he's going to match whatever Penix does because the Huskies gave up, I think, almost 370 or something to Daniels tonight at Stanford. And he's not you're ranking all the awesome quarterbacks in the Pac-12. You're naming 10 or 12 names before you get to Ashton Daniels in that conference. And so the fact that you have that performance, he can run the ball really well. He's a guy that can really hammer teams with his legs, but he is not known for being a prolific passer. And for him to put up that kind of performance on Washington's secondary, again, you know what their trap game is going to be in a couple weeks is, they're going to still have to go bang heads with Utah.
Yeah, and exactly.
That's
Utah's going to be able to score on them, unlike Oregon.
Right. And so that's going to be an interesting. We could see, much like the Pac-12, the carnage could continue here.
Yeah, and as we speak, Arizona's kicking off to Oregon State in the second quarter, and Arizona's up 10-7. That's a game that bears watching as well. There's a lot to talk about, a lot going on. Let's talk about the ACC because we just saw North Carolina go down to Georgia Tech. So 2 losses in a row for North Carolina. Remember, Jesse, do you remember, I don't know, 8 days ago when we thought North Carolina and Florida State would both be undefeated in the ACC championship game?
8 days ago, I think it was North Carolina, Florida State, Duke, and Louisville all had 0 ACC losses. and now Duke's lost twice. 2 more times. You got
how'd Louisville lose to Pitt? I realize I realized it was right after they beat Notre Dame, but you saw Pitt go to Notre Dame and get annihilated.
That you want to talk about like witnessing a murder. I know that's not the ACC. That's the
It was a snuff film.
That was the
It's
ACC's,
yeah.
ACC adjacent, ACC stepsister. What the Irish did today, that's like not suitable for work type stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a bodying. But to this game, North Carolina, it has been a house of horrors for them going to Georgia Tech. This is now back-to-back losses also to Brent
To
Key and the
Georgia
Yellow
Tech,
Jackets.
correct.
Their defensive improvements, RIP. Gene Chizik was getting a lot of acclaim 2 weeks ago for some of the strides that group has made. And now Virginia last week drops 30-something on them. You get hammered for 250 alone in the fourth quarter on the ground. Yikes, Tar Heels. Yikes.
Yeah, and I hope Tez Walker's going to be okay. It was a kind of a scary scene there at the end. It looked like he was out, and so hopefully he'll be all right. But what's the ACC? Okay, well, one thing, Florida State hadn't beaten Wake Forest since 2018. Came out and blew the doors off the Demon Deacons on Saturday. They looked great. Florida State seems to look better and better every week. So we can assume, even if Florida State were to slip up to Miami, we should probably assume Florida State's in the ACC championship. But who's opposite them? Is it Louisville?
I think it probably is Louisville, don't you think? Because they just played.
They shut out Duke. Duke did not run a play in the Louisville red zone.
Yeah, and I think that might – I don't remember exactly the rest of Louisville's schedule, but I think because I know they avoid North Carolina – right, because they avoid North Carolina, Florida State, it doesn't matter with Clemson, whatever, we can talk about them. The existential crisis they're about to go through or are going through currently. I think I would at least lean towards Louisville. Miami, though, still is in the mix because they survived a massive scare today.
They play. Miami survived Virginia. Louisville and Miami play on November 18th. So you do get to see that game, which, may have something to do with all of this, which wouldn't it be wild if it's two Florida State Miami games? But I don't think that's going to happen because I think Louisville might not lose another one.
It's hard to trust the Canes. Yeah. I mean, like, the way they played last weekend, and then you see them today, and they were losing for the majority of that game to Virginia. Yeah. The ACC's wild. I mean, Clemson, another loss.
Whoa.
Just a horrible loss.
They have 4 conference losses it's October still. How's this possible?
How much do you think DJU's dad and DJU are just smiling about all those stories last season? And then they came out this offseason and they put their name in front of it, and they were like, what Dabo and that offense is doing was limiting me. It was limiting our team, and that's why I decided to leave. Dabo clearly picked Cade Klubnik over DJ at the end of last season, which also obviously prompted the transfer. But Klubnik ain't it. That offense, it doesn't. Garrett Riley, it looks like exactly the same as what they were doing a year ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're letting Garrett Riley call his own offense. They probably said, you call this offense, which it's ugly. And Dabo said it on his radio show the other night, a couple weeks ago. You got to lose a couple to get the people to jump off the bandwagon. They're off. Don't worry, they're off now. You got the true believers with you now.
I think that bandwagon's leaking oil fast.
Yeah. So JD, the guitarist in the chat, says Clemson loss makes makes FSU look worse. Yeah, but FSU's killing people, and they did beat LSU as well, so that helps.
Yeah, I think the fact that the ACC seems even more watered down 2 weeks later than it was when they were also talking about potential tie-break scenarios atop the ACC if all these teams finished undefeated. I just think if Florida State wants to make the playoff, they do need to go unscathed. Yes. Because this conference now has it's sinking more towards the middle from where it was a couple weeks ago.
Right. And like the most respectable team left on their schedule that you could lose to, I think, is Miami, because by the time Florida gets to them, that record's not going to look real good. And
Right.
yeah, so I don't think there's anything they can do but go undefeated, which again, the playoff picture ahead of the first ranking on Tuesday night feels like it is sorting itself out already.
Go. Let's talk about the team that you watched live today.
Let's do that. So I was at the Florida Georgia game in Jacksonville. Florida roars down the field, great opening script, scores a touchdown, holds Georgia to a field goal on its first possession, and then Georgia just demolishes the Gators from that point forward. Florida goes for it on a fourth down on the next possession, 4th and inches. Instead of tush push, they snap it between Graham Mertz's legs to Trevor Etienne, who could have run or thrown, and instead got tackled. And then Georgia just turns the afterburners on, and that's it.
Now, it was a legitimately stupid play, but it was a legitimately cool play.
It was a great idea. You got to go for it on fourth down there in that situation, because you're not as good as them. They're more talented. You have to take chances, but you have a 6'5", 200-something pound quarterback. Like, you can push him. And Zion Logue, the Georgia defensive tackle, was like, we were sure they were going to do the Eagles thing.
So that's interesting. I didn't see that after, but here's a stat for you. So they also ran that double reverse that got blown up a couple plays earlier on that very drive. So they dialed up 2 trick plays on that drive.
Yeah, that was on a first down that kind of stalled it out. Yeah.
Right. After that blown up 4th down, Andy, Florida had 16 plays over their next 4 drives. And this is just when it became game over. 16 plays over the next 4 drives. They netted a minus 24, negative 24 yards. They went punt, another turnover on downs, sack, fumble, safety. I mean, Georgia looked for the first time all season like the unquestioned best team in America. This is like what Michigan has been doing to lesser Big Ten opponents, just straight bludgeoning them. I mean, what was it, 36 unanswered points, to really just put the game away. Carson Beck with a great, big time homecoming awesome. Back in Jacksonville.
Yeah. You're worried about no Brock Bowers, but Carson Beck looked great. They spread the ball around. Ladd McConkey was fantastic. He was basically, whenever they needed Ladd McConkey to make a big catch, he did.
Yeah. That first touchdown he had where he, somehow saw the field, peeled back left, and then just raced. I mean, that was a great play. Dominic Lovett.
Yeah, Dominic Lovett had a nice
catches.
Yep.
And Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards just kind of Georgia's offensive line. They have done this the last couple of seasons, and this is, again, what did we learn or what was confirmed? The last couple of years, Andy, as someone that we've watched this Georgia team so closely, they have turned up this gear coming out of the bye week.
Yeah.
It kind of started with this Florida game, and then it kind of propels the rest of the ball. Now, we'll find out if it's sustainable, but what they did today is similar to what happened the last couple seasons. There's consternation or worry that the pass rush isn't there. They come out today and they have 5 sacks, and they hound Graham Mertz.
That was the first fumble recovery they've gotten all season.
Right. And Kirby kind of talked about that afterwards, about, they'd been a little bit snake bit there, but they come up with that. The offensive line finally just started pushing. And Florida's got a good front 7. Florida has a shaky secondary, but their front 7, with those 2 transfers inside, Cam Jackson, Shamar, at linebacker. I know he was kind of, banged up before the game, but he played most of the game.
Yeah, thanks to the turf, apparently.
Thanks to the turf, yeah. But I mean, it was an impressive performance, and one that I think Georgia needed to show.
So before the game, I guess Dan Mullen on one of the halftime shows picked Florida to beat Georgia. Dan Mullen, former Florida coach, hasn't said a lot of nice things about the Gators this year in his role at ESPN, but he picks them to beat Georgia. And somebody asked Kirby Smart about that after the game, and oh boy,
And I don't see it or hear it, but I know it's out there. Somebody texted me before the game. It's like all these people predicting that we're not gonna, we're not gonna win today, and I'm just like, golly, where's that coming from? Supposed to be my friend. He didn't like to recruit though, so it gets him.
I'd like to report.
Talk about witnessing a murder.
187. Good Lord. Remember, it was there 2 years ago that Kirby Smart gives the "you can't out scheme talent" speech in that press conference. And then poor David Waters, the following Monday, tries to lob a softball to Dan Mullen about recruiting to get Dan Mullen to say, yeah, we're still recruiting too. And Dan Mullen pulls we'll talk about recruiting when it's recruiting time.
When it's recruiting season.
And then throws a hissy fit. And that's when everybody knew it was over at that point. It was done. And that's
not great.
But that's what Florida's up against. That they are trying to reach that level of talent. They have to recruit to it. Their youngest players probably are their best players right now. The best players seem to be the ones that Billy Napier's brought into the program for the past 2 years. The question is, will they be patient enough with him for as long as it takes to get enough recruiting classes so that game is more even? Because the talent gap is the Grand Canyon right now.
Well, yeah, and the other question is, and I like Billy a lot, but the other question that you have to kind of pose when you're talking about this, Andy, is the plan makes sense. We're going to recruit and play and build our program in the image of Georgia. But
Correct.
Can you do that? While Georgia is being
Georgia?
Not like it's not like you can't press pause on what's happening in Athens and press fast forward on what's happening in Gainesville. It doesn't work that way. And so that's kind of the big existential crisis that Florida fans and the Florida people are having to deal with is Billy's accumulating talent. He's going to sign a top 5 class this year. Georgia has the number 1 class.
Yep. But I mean, that's what Alabama was.
How do you make it?
Alabama was still signing number 1 classes, and Georgia was signing top 2 or 3 classes, and Georgia surpassed them. So if you do it right and you evaluate right, then you can do it. It's been done, but it will take more time because the situation Kirby inherited at Georgia, there was a lot more talent there. Mark Richt left a lot more talent behind.
The canyon, I think we're talking about 2 different canyons. You're talking about the Grand Canyon right now between Georgia and Florida, and like a tiny little, the difference with it. It's almost apples to oranges to me.
Oh yeah, because Mark Richt left Kirby Smart a ton of NFL talent, like that.
Roquan Smith, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel,
exactly.
Lorenzo Carter. I mean,
yeah.
But
the SEC is going to get interesting. Georgia's schedule that looked so easy at the beginning of the year, the next 3 games don't look easy at all. They've got Missouri, Ole Miss. Now, both of those are at home, and then they're at Tennessee. I would worry about them in this stretch. Like, if they can get through this undefeated, they'll be fine. Like, they're going to go into the playoff, and they're probably going to three-peat. But this will be a tough stretch for them.
And they need to be tested. They were able to kind of skate by, and now we'll see. I mean, Ole Miss took care of business today against Vanderbilt. Quinshon Judkins, back-to-back precise 124-yard, 2-touchdown performances. He's kind of found his groove after a really slow start. Tennessee, that today was, I did not expect a shootout against Kentucky. That was the best Joe Milton's looked.
That's the best Joe Milton and the best Devin Leary have looked.
Yes, Devin Leary helping out my QB score there, our QB draft score.
And Jaden Daniels is off this week, so I'm screwed.
He finally gave me a nice game after throwing up some stinkers. Yeah, Tennessee's defense was bad today. Josh Heupel needs to quit bitching about the officials. I mean, that's just he did another. He's just not going to endear himself with that group when he continues to kind of show them up in the post-game press conferences. And there was some missed holds again. But
what are you complaining about? You won.
Exactly. He won. But Milton, I thought, was impressive. He took care of the ball. He only had a couple incompletions. Tennessee's always going to be able to run the ball. They Dylan Sampson and Jalen Wright are just a two-headed tandem.
Lost their left guard and left tackle during the game tonight. Still ran 47 times for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was impressive. That was very good. And they
salted the game away with the run when they needed to.
4-minute offense won the game. And
right.
They didn't. That's not a team I would expect to be able to do that. And they did, which was very impressive.
Yeah, I agree. That's and they're still in the mix. They do have 2 losses, so they're going to need a lot of help, but they could at least play spoiler, and they host Georgia in a couple weeks on Rocky Top.
Well, and that's the thing. Like that, they've just got to hope that Missouri or Ole Miss comes through and can beat Georgia. I don't like the problem is we've yet to see that old Art Briles offense beat a Nick Saban or Kirby Smart coached defense. We haven't seen it yet. So I'm sure it'll happen eventually, but it seems like a bad stylistic matchup.
And there's also kind of, notions out there, Andy, that the more these SEC teams see this defense, the more they've kind of caught on. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of been some of Tennessee's, offensive struggles this year, particularly in the passing game, that folks have started to adjust a little bit to the tempo. They understand some of the wide hashes. It's not, we haven't ever seen this before, like the triple option. You face it a couple times and you suddenly have you're able to read your keys a little easier and get some beats on stuff. So they also have to play Missouri too.
That's another tricky one. And that one's in Columbia.
These teams could all beat up on each other. So
it'll be fun to watch down the stretch. Again, if Georgia, I gotta tell you, Jesse, if Georgia plays the way they did on Saturday, they're going to win these next 3, and they're going to go to the SEC championship game.
Oh, I agree.
Be able to beat whoever they see in that game too, if they're playing like this. But we've seen variability with Georgia, whereas the previous 2 years we didn't see any variability.
I agree. But today they looked as impressive as any team. The way they just kind of, you give up an opening script drive, and then to just completely stuff Florida into a locker for the next 3 quarters was a strong showing.
It was great. Let's move to the Big Ten. Ohio State, Wisconsin. Ohio State lets them hang around. Then you have a very special Marvin Harrison Jr. catch for a touchdown. Like, once again, we have him and you don't. You have no chance as long as we have him and you don't. And I think that applies to everybody they play until they play Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, they struggle to score 20 points again, Andy. And I know Wisconsin's defense is feisty, but they're not. I wouldn't call them good.
Right.
This is Ohio State is kind of they're. You know who they are? They're Iowa of the last couple of years, only with the best player. With
the elite offensive talent, yes.
Specifically the best offensive player in America who happens to be a cheat code.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think it's going to definitely be enough to beat Michigan, but they're winning by. I mean, they're winning ugly. They're winning these grind out games. I really don't understand. Luke Fickell, I thought he had some plays today punting there in the second half. I thought he should have gone. They got kind of screwed at the end of the first half with the overturned touchdown, and he still settles for a field goal. I don't know. You don't have really anything to lose. You're almost, the 15-point underdog.
I kind of like
the Big Ten West is a mess, anyways. So
I like Braden Locke. I feel like he's gotten comfortable since he took over for Mordecai. Like it was very ugly in the Iowa game when he took over for Mordecai, but it feels like he's more comfortable now, and
I think he's better than Tanner Mordecai.
He could be. And so the Big Ten West can be very interesting because Wisconsin will have its say. But guess who's not out of this thing yet? The Cornhuskers of Nebraska. They beat Purdue 31-14. They look better and better every week, Jesse, and they're on a nice little winning streak. They are 1 win away from bowl eligibility. And look, bowl eligibility for Nebraska is a fine goal. Be happy with that. Don't worry. If you get that, great. But they're going to get that. Like, they play Michigan State next week. They should win that game. They play Maryland after that. Maryland just lost to Northwestern. Then they've got Wisconsin and Iowa. Like, they could win all of these games.
They could go to the Big Ten championship game and play
Yes.
Michigan again.
Ooh,
And they don't want to do that. But folks will poo-poo the whole bowl eligibility thing. They haven't made a bowl since 2016. This would be a big deal in Lincoln.
Yeah.
This would be a big deal. And it would show a proof of concept in year one for Matt Rule. He's already recruiting better. Yeah, I don't think they'll I doubt they win out, Andy, but I wouldn't be surprised if they win 3 or 4. And Maryland's going in all the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Iowa can't cough and get.
Well, Iowa regressed to the mean with that loss to Minnesota because they kept, you look at like success rates, they kept having a lower net success rate every game and winning. That's not sustainable. Eventually that comes back around and evens out. So that's what's going on with Iowa. And Nebraska is think about if they beat Minnesota. Think about if they don't turn the ball over as they're salting the game away against Minnesota. Like, they're in the driver's seat in the West if that happened.
Well, that's the difference. I mean, Jeff Sims had 4 or 5 picks in like 30 attempts.
Yeah, I mean, they were going to lose to Colorado, but yeah.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, on the seat in that Nebraska game, and then in the Minnesota game, and then Colorado turns the ball over a million times. You lose those games. Suddenly, you stop, just handing your opponent free possessions, and you're in these ball games. That 3-3-5 defense, the Big Ten hadn't seen a whole lot of that, and it seems to be working fairly well for the Cornhuskers right now.
Yeah, they've done a very good job. So I'm really impressed with this. And look, it's not perfect. Are they in any danger of going back to being what they were in the 90s? No, not right now. But this is so much better than what they have been, where they were just losing all these one possession games that they shouldn't be losing, and they should be happy with this right now. And if they can get bowl eligible, get the 15 extra practices, it's a big deal. It is a very big deal. One more game in the Big Ten that I wanted to talk about is Indiana-Penn State, because Penn State looked bad for most of this game. Then you get the end of the game where Indiana goes conservative, and then Penn State finally throws deep. It's like the end of Zoolander. I turned left.
I mean, James Franklin almost let Ryan Day beat him twice. That's what this was. I mean, this team completely no-showed. Drew Allard was struggling. The defense was allowing an Indiana team that ranked last, Andy, in the Big Ten in scoring to kind of roll up and down the field. And in the sequence that you're talking about, they get Drew Allard throws his first career interception, just a chuck and duck.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana gets the ball basically inside the 20-yard line.
Very similar to the Oklahoma-Kansas situation.
It was very similar. And they didn't go backwards, but for a guy that's coaching for his job, Tom Allen and the offense, I mean, they just completely turtled. They ran the ball on 2nd and 8 and 3rd and 8. Kick a game-tying field goal. Allard comes out 3 plays later. He throws a 57-yard strike to Lambert, and then it's a sack fumble for a safety, and the game's over. So this score looks 33-24. It was 24-24 inside of like a minute and a half or 2 minutes.
Let me throw a scenario at you that just happened. Oregon State, Arizona is going on as we speak. It's 10-10. It's the final play of the half. Oregon State is lined up for a 34-yard field goal attempt. They fake it and get tackled. Do not score it. Like, you have to score a touchdown because the clock is going to run out.
Jonathan
Why do you
Smith,
fake there? Just take the points.
What you doing, Jonathan? I did not see that.
Yeah, Jonathan Smith and Jed Fish like pointing to the locker room.
Just
Everybody get in the locker room because we're not going to get any luckier than that. Than them faking a field goal as time is running out in the half. So we'll see what happens in that game. But one other result I would like to point out, Jesse, we've talked about several undefeated teams. I want to mention an undefeated team that is not going to make the college football playoff, despite the fact that I think they're going to go undefeated.
The Falcons?
James Madison Dukes.
Oh, the Dukes. I thought you were talking about Air Force. Okay.
Well, the Falcons, listen, I think the Falcons are going to make, if they keep going, they're going to be the group of 5 representative in the New Year's 6. And if there were a 12-team playoff, they'd be making it.
They're going to be in an arm wrestling match with Tulane, I think.
Yeah, but the Falcons are going to be undefeated. If they lose, then I think Tulane probably jumps them. But the Falcons went to snowy Colorado State, snowy Fort Collins.
Got pelted.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
They threw flags on the Colorado State fans for throwing snowballs at the Air Force players.
They went on the PA system multiple times and warned the fans to stop throwing snowballs at Air Force players. And then it got so bad they had to literally throw an unsportsmanlike flag penalty in the third quarter.
Now,
unbelievable.
In football equipment, I don't think a snowball does a lot of damage unless somebody
you're
a
right.
battery inside it. But I don't think it's that bad of a deal. But it was a beautiful backdrop, and Air Force again just keeps going. So we'll see if they can keep rolling. But I want to talk about JMU. This is the closest anybody's been to them. Old Dominion gave them a fight, but JMU wins 30-27. They are now 8-0, 5-0 in the Sun Belt. They're not allowed to play in a bowl game. It's the stupidest thing ever. They need to let them play in a bowl game.
Don't you? I concur. I rubber stamp that sentiment. I would also add, if the NCAA doesn't relent and they won't allow them to play, I think they ought to schedule a game with Jacksonville State.
Jacksonville State, that would be
Hawaii.
Awesome. Yes.
Go play in Hawaii.
Yeah, what are the NCAA gonna do to them if they just schedule a game and go play? Like, how are they gonna stop them?
They should have 2 middle fingers up at them, because if you're not going to let them play, I understand the sentiment behind the rule, because they don't want teams just taking money to jump up and into the FBS. But when you clearly have been one of the best, or if not the best team in your conference the last 2 years, let the boys play.
Right, and the Sun
was
Belt's
that Herman
a good
Boone?
league.
Let the boys play.
Like they're not running through a league that is, a bunch of, FCS teams. They are running through a good FBS league. I don't know. You're right. Let them do it. Let them play. It's crazy that they don't, because one of the other things you're trying to avoid is you don't want like an FCS team that has like a senior heavy roster to jump up, play in a bowl game, jump back down. They're not jumping back down. They clearly have the resources in place. They are a dominant program in a good league.
Yeah, the rule exists for teams like Sam Houston State that, can't get a win right now and keep coughing up potential wins. But there should be some sort of exemption for programs like James Madison that dominated FCS and then come up and they just keep kicking the tails off these teams, even in FBS. So.
All right, Jesse, we've covered this week pretty thoroughly. Let's turn the page to next week, because it's a huge week on the field. Huge week on the field. Alabama, LSU could determine the SEC West. You've got Missouri going to Georgia. You've got USC, Washington. You've got Kansas State, Texas.
Bedlam.
Maybe the last Bedlam for a long, long time. It's going to be a huge week on the field. Michigan plays Purdue. Michigan's back on the field for the first time since all of this broke. All of the Connor Stallions and all of it. That is going to be wild. Jim Harbaugh has to come get in front of a microphone.
On Monday.
That is going to be wild.
What will he say, pray tell?
Oh, I was going to say, I didn't know anything, and I can't comment on an NCAA investigation. You're covered there. But The other question is what's going on behind the scenes. What are the other Big Ten teams saying to Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, who is really the only person who can do anything now? But would you do anything now? Because I don't think you'd want to hurt one of your own teams that could potentially win the national title for you.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I'm very skeptical that any punishment could be doled out by the Big Ten because they have zero impetus to do so. They want Michigan and that brand playing.
No, I'm sure Ohio State and Penn State and Nebraska and everybody else furious, but it's God, this is going to be.
Well, does the faucet of information keep dripping too? Because it got turned off because the games this weekend. Mm-hmm. But I think there's going to be some of these insiders that have been breaking this stuff. Does that faucet get turned back on? That story that the Washington Post dumped was extremely enlightening. And if they have that sort of information, here's a reporter's hunch that they're going to get more because you're talking to some insiders. If you're talking to folks that somehow have access to what it has been seen on Michigan's computers.
Exactly. And I think at this point, there's so much stuff out there that is, you would have thought was unbelievable that has been proven already. Like when that Oregon guy posts the random screenshot, the Oregon fan posts a screenshot on Scoop Duck, doesn't even realize what he's posting. Because he's like, oh, this must happen everywhere. Last year we were at the Oregon-Washington game and this guy was in front of us filming the Oregon sideline. And it turns out he was in a seat buffed by Connor Stallions. Like the guy had no clue. Some Tennessee fan posted on VolQuest.
Tennessee VolQuest.
Yeah. That somebody had basically outlined the whole thing to them in December. and they posted it. And everybody's like, yeah, that sounds like hooey. But no, 100% true. Golly. It is
spicy.
That story is wild. It's gotten to the point where you almost believe anything that comes out because it's been so bizarre. So there is more to come with that one. More stuff's going to happen between now and then. And then you've got, the Pac-2, like Oregon State, Washington State going to move forward as the Pac-2. That's incredible.
Well, also on Michigan, one last thing. I mean, you also have at the same time dueling scandals with the FBI in town, with all the Matt Weiss stuff, and that's just an added like distraction, fallout,
And are we sure they're not related? I know that the University of Michigan police said one's not related to the other. Are we positive of that yet? I don't think we are.
I don't know. It's a web. It's a web of something up there.
Yeah, it will be a very interesting week in a lot of places. And yes, then we get to Saturday. The games are going to be bonkers because like Alabama LSU is going to be crazy. We don't know what Alabama is going to show up. We know LSU can score like crazy. We also know LSU gives up points like crazy. USC Washington. Like Washington has struggled these past 2 weeks to win. And USC, the defense has to play against those receivers and Michael Penix Jr. Like that game is going to be wild. The Texas-Kansas State game. Texas still playing with a backup quarterback. Kansas State is crushing people right now.
And then you even have. I mean, like we didn't talk about this one because it's whatever. They were supposed to win. They were 17-point favorites. Texas A&M beat South Carolina.
Oh yeah.
Okay, you took care of business. You took care.
Now
of
you got to play Ole Miss.
Well, now you got to play Ole Miss. Yeah, and so what happens if Lane, runs it up there in Oxford on Jimbo? That's again there's storylines galore, Andy. Storylines galore.
Jesse, I cannot wait. Can't wait. Guys, we'll talk to you Sunday night.